Welcome to the part of the week that matters the most. It's Wealth Matters, your wealth matters.
Jesus Christ.
I'm Warren, I'm a corporate banker in the City of London, and I'm here to make wealth building simple and accessible. This month, guys, it's a big one in terms of an economic update. We recently had the September spending review and the autumn budget announced by Rishi Sunak.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make his budget statement.
This is really big for the UK economy because it tells us where we're at in terms of the economy. It's like a snapshot, and it also tells us what areas the government's looking to spend on in the coming year. So things like taxes, transport, education, all of that affects us on a day-to-day basis, housing on a day-to-day basis. We're going to go into it in more detail in this video. So let's start with some context. So the spending review takes place every 2 to 4 years, and it sets out the government spending plans for each of the government departments, as I mentioned, over the next 3 financial years. And this document on screen that you can see is the House of Commons presentation on the background to the spending review and the budget. I really prefer to go through the actual documents that the government produces because it gives you the detail that they don't necessarily go through all of it in the House of Commons when Rishi Sunak gives his presentation. So let's go straight to a summary of what's happening right here. So the summary of the mini budget. So when we talk about the budget, that's what the government's going to be spending on over the coming years. There's going to be increased NHS spending, and God knows we need it after the last 18 months that we've had. NHS as an organisation overall, even before the global health crisis, has been underfunded for a long time. So nothing really new here, guys. For those of you who are watching this from a different country, the NHS is our national health service. We're very lucky in this country to get a government provided national health service. A lot of countries don't have this, but ours in general is underfunded. There's going to be a national insurance increase of 1.2% from April 2022. We'll look at this in more detail as we go on in this video. And there's going to be changes to the pension system. So let's quickly talk about the context of where we are as an economy and the context behind this budget and this spending review. So the government deficit, i.e. the difference between what the government spends and what the government receives, mainly in terms of tax revenues, we are at a record peacetime deficit of £320 billion. You might be wondering, what does peacetime mean, Warren? Well, basically non-war scenario, because as you can imagine, in the scenario of a war, when the country's at war, government spends a hell of a lot of money on area of spending for an economy. So when a country's at war, a lot of money gets sunk into that. We're obviously not at war right now, thank God. And right now the government is in its biggest deficit on record for a peacetime period. And this slide right here is a really good summary of the current government deficit. As we described, when the government spends more money than revenue, it raises from taxes and other sources, it borrows money. There's a deficit and that money has to come from somewhere, so it borrows money, mainly from financial institutions. So we're talking about banks, pension funds, etc. And it gives you specific numbers here in 2020, 2021, basically during the whole period of the global health crisis. Government raised 795 billion from tax and other revenues, and it spent 1.1 trillion. So there's a net deficit of 320 billion, as you can see here. And the explanation that they give for the deficit here is first and foremost the coronavirus related support for public services. So, you know, the NHS was under pressure. There was a furlough scheme, we built hospitals, track and trace, etc., etc. And then let's talk about secondly, the virus and related lockdowns took the economy into a severe recession. And then secondly, the virus and related lockdowns took us into a recession. So there's less economic activity, businesses were closed down for long periods of time, people were out of work, people lost their jobs. So when there's less economic activity, obviously the government's collecting less tax receipts. So spending's gone up, tax receipts have gone down, you got the deficit right there, guys. That's the primary reason behind the deficit in the economy over this period. And that begs the question, guys, who is going to pay for this? We cannot rely on the likes of Matt Hancock and his fellow Eton and Cambridge and Oxford friends and his chums to help save us from this predicament we're in. They're too busy enjoying the millions of pounds that they've made from all of these pandemic related government juicy contracts, because of course, why waste a good crisis when you can make millions from it? Which takes us nicely into taxes, guys. So in April, Rishi Sunak did a budget, the spring budget, And that was the biggest tax raising budget since 1993. Don't be fooled by the front loading of the tax freezing announcements that he gave. It was appropriate to freeze taxes such as our personal allowance and corporation tax for the next few years. However, as we'll see later on in this video, it actually leaves us worse off, and down the line he's actually going to raise those taxes. So the net effect over the next 5 to 6 years is this is actually going to raise the income of the government through taxes over the long term. And we can see here, so the income tax-free allowance, i.e. the personal allowance, is going to be frozen until April 2026. Again, we'll talk about this more as we go along. But you can see here, as I summarize here, by 2025, 2026, the freezing of this, it sounds like a good thing, but the freezing will actually mean that 1.3 million more people pay income tax. There was also a freezing of the higher rate threshold. So if you're a higher rate income tax payer, that threshold has been frozen at the current level of 50,270 until April 2026. And to summarize here, that freeze will create an additional 1 million higher rate taxpayers by 2025, 2026. And then we can also see that the national insurance contribution is going to be raised by 1.25% from April 2022. Let's also cover universal credit really quickly. So there was a £20 a week uplift in universal credit, which helped a lot of households that really needed this, especially the lower income ones during the global health crisis. This uplift is going to be withdrawn from the 5th of October. So summarizes here, over 4 million families in the UK are gonna have a fall in income of £20 per week. Might seem like a very small amount to the likes of you and me, but as somebody who grew up in a working class, single parent family on a council estate, £20 a week to a low income household is a huge fall. It really is for those types of households, guys. And guys, because my channel is heavy on the property side, let's look at what's happening with housing. So over the last decade, so this is what the government usually do. They tell you what they've done good and then what they're going to do next. So they have increased the housing supply from 137,000 in 2010-11 to 244,000. What are they going to do going forward? So we're seeing here that the spending review that has just been announced, they're going to invest a further 1.8 billion to meet the government's commitment of 10 billion investment in housing supply and stock and unlock over 1 million new homes. It will be great to see what the timescale for this is. When do they expect to build these 1 million new homes by? It's a good thing overall, guys. We need more houses in this country. If you've watched my monthly updates on the housing market, you will know that there is a huge demand, over demand and under supply of houses in this country, which has been pushing the housing market up like that over the last 18 months. We need more houses in this country, according to the government. I have my own thoughts and opinions on that, but essentially that's what the government's stance is. And each successive government, not just this one, they're talking about it right now, but over the last decade, every single government that's come in, and beyond that, to be fair, talked about building more homes, more homes, more homes. So in line with that, the government's committing to building more. And then lastly, guys, I thought it would be quite helpful to give you this. It's an overview of how government spending has changed or trended over the last 6 years. So these lines, basically, I want to draw your attention to these different colored lines. They represent areas of the economy or of society that the government spends its money on, and this is the percentage change over time. So transport, basically the largest increase out of these in terms of spending is transport. The government has ploughed a lot of money into transport, and this is primarily driven by network rail spending. All I know is that there's always still loads of signal failures and delays on trains, especially on the southeastern and southern railway lines. Let me know if you disagree. What's the worst national rail train line in the UK? My vote goes for southeast and southern, but I digress. Large spending on transport. DEFRA, this is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I mean, they basically develop and implement policy on the environment, food and rural issues, farming and food production. This hike in spending is basically came as a result of us leaving the EU and DEFRA having to pay to supplement the activities of farmers in the UK. And as you can see, 2019 is when we left the EU. and that spending has hiked up. That's the main cause of this increase in spending. Health and social care, education, local government. Wow, local government's really struggled over the years. Local government is basically our boroughs, and they're responsible for our local services. So things like social care, schools, housing, waste collection, all of the stuff that we need on a day-to-day basis, severely underfunded over the last 5 years. Education very low, health and social care very low, which is a shame. But that's an overview of how spending has trended over the last 6 years, which I thought would be useful for us to see. So let's get into some metrics in the economy. Let's have a look at unemployment. I think this is an interesting one to start with this month. So unemployment has been steadily decreasing over the months, which is obviously a good thing. As the economy has recovered from the pandemic-related recession, there's been increased demand for products and services. Obviously, the government has also helped with the furlough scheme to keep people in employment. That's why we haven't seen huge spikes in unemployment. The government has done that purposefully to preserve the economy. When there are huge numbers of people out of work, obviously economic activity declines, social unrest, reductions in tax receipts, all of that stuff that negatively affects the economy and society as a whole. So government have done a lot to keep people in work and in their jobs, and we can see the stats support this, so well done to the government. Related to unemployment, there has been certain industries in the UK that have struggled to find workers to employ into jobs. A prime example would be HGV, heavy goods vehicle drivers in the UK. If you've been in the UK over the last few months, you'll have seen the issues related to the supply of fuel. The media have dubbed it a fuel crisis. There's no fuel to go around, everybody panic. That's what the media does. But it's not quite that, guys. As we know, the media likes to sensationalize stuff to get the clicks, to get the advertising, to get eyeballs on them. It's really been related to a lack of supply, issues trying to find drivers to drive these specific types of vehicles that transport fuel, among other goods, in and out of the UK. Now, as we said, the primary issue behind this stems from a lack of supply, and sitting behind that, the reason why there's a lack of supply, down to several factors. One of them being an aging workforce. So HGV drivers in the UK apparently are aging, so they're having issues trying to get younger drivers to take up these jobs. The virus has played a part as well. Those who have actually sent in applications to drive these specific types of vehicles, because you need a special license to do so. A lot of admin backlogs in terms of processing those applications and granting those licenses to the drivers, so that's added to the supply issue. And of course, Brexit has also played its part, because a lot of these drivers, or a good number of these drivers, were formerly from the EU. We've said, hey, we don't want you anymore. Well, not directly, but you know, they're stealing British jobs apparently. So we voted out of the EU, not just because of that, but you know, it's one of the byproducts. So we now have a lack of supply. Same with nurses, right? And NHS staff. A lot of the people within the NHS were from abroad, EU countries. And, you know, we voted ourselves out, and now we have a lack of supply, and it leads to issues like this. Our own fault, really. So then the knock-on effect from that, guys, is that we have less drivers that are able to bring the goods that we need into this country. Media frames it as a supply of fuel shortage, when it's really down to actually a labour supply issue, okay? But overall, as we can see on screen, unemployment has been falling. Government have done well in that sense to try and protect the labour market. However, specific industries are struggling. And then let's look at inflation. We spent quite a lot of time last month looking at inflation and why that's important. So if you want to get more of a background in depth as to why inflation is important to everyday people like you and me, watch that video. But we can see that inflation has basically risen quite significantly since the beginning of the year. We're at September now, and it's still remaining at the 3% mark. The Bank of England's target inflation rate is 2%, so we are quite some way above that. And it's primarily because of the upturn in the economy since the lockdown has eased. However, the government won't want us to sustain this 3%, because the government do not want prices in the economy to grow at an unsustainable and volatile level. 2% is the level of inflation at which the government are comfortable with and judge prices to be rising at a steady and sustainable level. And if we go back into the budget, We can see here that inflation has risen. Yep, just talked about that. Government actually expect inflation to continue to rise into 2020. You've got that 3.1% mark that we just saw on the other screen. And they make a good point here that the inflationary pressures have been driven, they're a bit more specific in terms of what's driving it, energy prices, petrol costs going up, and also linking it to the supply chain issues that we just talked about. If there are still supply shortages, the general level of prices in our economy will continue to go up. The big question off the back of this, guys, is there going to be a base rate increase? Because again, we talked about this in previous videos, but when inflation is growing at a level that the government want to slow down, what they tend to do is to raise the Bank of England base rate. So that means that borrowing for people like us and companies, so whether it's loans, goods on finances, our mortgages, the cost of that goes up. There's less money in our pockets, spending cools down, prices settle down, and the economy stabilizes. That's really a high level nutshell of the mechanism by which the government seeks to cool down the economy via increasing their base rate. So I'm expecting the base rate to rise. Question is, by how much? What do you guys think? We're now at, I believe it's 0.1%. Base rates have never been this low. I'm talking for decades. So it is time for the base rate to go up, but the question is by how much? Going to be very interesting. Let me know your predictions down below. And then lastly, I wanted to end on GDP. That's the big one. That's a temperature check of the economy. We do not have September's numbers, which is quite disappointing. However, do not fear. We do have some commentary in the spending review and the budget on what they think is going to happen to GDP. They framed it here in terms of spending, and we know that GDP is the value of all goods and services produced in the economy. So spending is a good proxy of that. Basically what they're saying here is that we need the people, the good citizens of the UK to spend their money in order for the economy to recover strongly. Then they discuss some of the factors that could prevent this. So first off is rising inflation. So we talked just a minute ago about how inflation is affecting the economy. If inflation continues, prices will continue to rise, and therefore people will have less money in their pocket to spend, and therefore they'll stop spending money. So we need people to carry on spending in order for the economy to grow. So inflation could be a factor preventing this. Talks about the withdrawal of pandemic-related government support schemes. So we saw the universal credit, the £20 a week uplift being withdrawn. There was also furlough that's being withdrawn, and the support for small businesses being withdrawn. This is basically going to affect people's incomes. They're going to have less money to spend. So once again, will this have a knock-on effect on the general level of spending across the economy? And then in these two bullets here, it basically talks about savings. So a lot of people have saved their money, as you do during an economic recession or a downturn in the economy. Question is, are people going to start spending those savings? And linked to that is, are people going to be more cautious? This really is the most important one. It really is the overarching question. How do people feel? Yes, you've got the actual metrics like inflation and amounts of savings. Those are the numerical, tangible, measurable metrics that we can use to predict the economy. However, there is no metric or number that you can assign to how people feel. We're complex individuals. So you could have £1 million in your pocket in savings off the back of the last 18 months. However, how do you feel about the economy? Do you feel confident and optimistic to go out and renovate your house, buy a new house, buy a new car, go on a shopping spree, go on a holiday? All of this is spending that stimulates the economy. If you don't feel optimistic enough to do that, you're going to keep that money in the bank, in your pocket, and the economy is going to stand still. Obviously, not everybody has £1 million in their pocket. For me, it's more like 20 quid. But the question is, how do people feel in terms of their outlook on the economy? We've been through a lot. Are we now in a position where we're like, okay, we're out of this, shackles are off, let's enjoy ourselves again, let's get back to normal? Or are we going to be, we still don't know what's coming around the corner, let's keep money in our pockets and wait it out another 6 months? How do you feel, guys? What are your feelings and thoughts and predictions on the economy? Are you going to go out and enjoy yourself next year? Are you going to spend more, or are you going to wait it out just in case we get another variant? Okay, let me know. Thank you for watching to the end. Guys, I've put together a property dashboard tool. If you're looking to buy a property in a short or medium term, this dashboard is going to calculate all of the key metrics and figures that you need to know when you're buying a property. It's going to automatically calculate things like your stamp duty costs, your returns, your profits, the future rise in value of your house, and if you're overpaying for that property relative to the UK average, as well as many other useful metrics and figures. The link is in the description below. And now back to the video. Guys, I hope you found this video useful. If you do, drop a like, leave a comment. Really love to hear what you think about the economy. Follow me on Instagram, here. Don't know what side it appears on, one of them. Post quite regularly. I love engaging with you on there as well. And I'll see you guys soon.